Her family kept mocking me for being fat. I couldn't take it anymore, so I showed them no mercy. Hey Reddit, I'm using a throwaway account because I don't want this associated with my main one. My wife, Vivian, follows me on that account, and I really don't want her or anyone in her family to know that I'm writing this. I guess I'm just here to get this off my chest, because I need somewhere to rant, and I don't know how else to process everything that's been going on. So, my name is Matthew, and I'm 30 years old. My wife, Vivian, is also 30, and we've been married for about 3 years. On the surface, things have always seemed good between us. We met in college, fell in love right from the start, and everything felt perfect. You know the kind of relationship that feels almost scripted, where everything just seems to click? That's how it felt with Vivian, at least in the beginning. From the start, I've always been a very romantic person. I've always been the kind of guy who wears his heart on his sleeve. Romance is my thing. I've always gone out of my way to make sure Vivian is happy. Whether it's planning little surprises for her, cooking her favorite meals, or just being there for her when she needed me, I've always put her first. I thought that's what being in love meant, always giving your all, doing everything to make your partner feel special. It made me happy to see her smile, and I thought that was all that mattered. But as time went on, I started noticing that I was the one always going out of my way. It wasn't just the occasional surprise or the little things. Everything was on me. If I didn't plan anything, nothing would happen. I was always the one planning our anniversaries, birthdays, and vacations. If I didn't plan anything or remind her about an important date, it would just slip by without notice. Vivian would always seem to forget. But I told myself it wasn't a big deal. After all, I loved her, and I believed she loved me too. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I say that if I hadn't reminded her about my own birthday or our wedding anniversary, she would have completely forgotten. It used to bother me a bit, but again, like I said before, I would brush it off because I loved her. I figured she just wasn't the romantic type, and I was okay with that. At least I told myself I was. But it wasn't just about planning things or celebrating special days. It extended to our entire relationship. If I didn't put in the effort, nothing would happen. I was the one making the sacrifices, the one adjusting my schedule to make time for her. And even when it came to the house, I was the one doing the majority of the work. Even the little things around the house, organizing bills, making sure things were in order, everything, seemed to fall on my shoulders. It wasn't just the financial strain, but the emotional load as well. If I didn't keep everything running, nothing would get done. And the worst part? I didn't mind, at least not at first. I just kept telling myself that this was what love looked like, that I was doing what I had to do for the woman I adored. Vivian and I decided that she would be a stay-at-home wife, which I agreed to because I wanted to support her dreams. We don't have kids, though I've always wanted to start a family. She, on the other hand, wasn't ready, even though we had discussed this before and had agreed to start having kids when we were 30. She wanted to wait a few more years, which of course I respected. It's her body, and I didn't want to pressure her into anything she wasn't ready for. So I took on the role of the main provider, working full-time to make sure everything was taken care of while she stayed home. The thing is, being the sole provider didn't bother me. I'm not complaining about that. I was more than happy to take on the responsibility of making sure Vivian had everything she needed. I worked hard because I believed I was building a life for both of us, a future where we could grow old together, where we could eventually have kids, travel, and live the dream that we had always talked about. But what really started to weigh on me wasn't the long hours or the stress of being the only one bringing in money. It was the realization that Vivian didn't seem to appreciate anything I was doing. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how many sacrifices I made, it felt like it was never enough. I would come home exhausted after a long day, hoping for even a small gesture, some acknowledgement that I was doing all of this for us. But instead, she was always distant, always distracted. It was as if I didn't even exist to her sometimes. I'd walk through the door and she'd barely look up from her phone or whatever show she was binge watching. There was no, "How was your day?" or even a simple smile. Just nothing. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was going through something. Maybe she was tired or dealing with something she didn't want to talk about. I tried to be understanding. I thought if I just worked a little harder, gave her more time, maybe things would go back to the way they used to be. But as time went on, the distance between us only grew. She wasn't as invested in our relationship as I was. I was always the one initiating conversations, trying to make plans and keeping things going. It was like I was living with a roommate, not a wife. And the worst part, she didn't seem to care. There was no effort from her side, no reciprocity. It was all me. Back then, I was so blinded by love that I convinced myself it was just a phase. I told myself that this was what marriage was. Ups and downs, good times and bad. I thought that maybe I just needed to be patient, that she would come around eventually. But now, looking back on everything with clearer eyes, I realize that maybe she never truly even loved me. It's a hard pill to swallow, and it's taken me a long time to admit it to myself. But all the signs were there, right from the start. I just didn't want to see them. I was so caught up in the idea of us, in the image of what I thought our relationship was supposed to be, that I ignored all the red flags. The lack of interest, the indifference, the way she never really put any effort into our relationship. It all pointed to the same truth. Vivian wasn't in love with me. Maybe she never was. I think that's what hurts the most. I gave everything I had, my time, my energy, my love. I poured all of myself into this relationship. And for what? To be ignored? To be taken for granted? It's like I was carrying the weight of our entire marriage on my shoulders, and she was just there, going through the motions, detached and uninterested. There were times when I'd try to talk to her about it, but those conversations never went anywhere. She'd brush me off, say I was overreacting, or worse, get annoyed that I was making a big deal out of nothing. And maybe that's the part that stings the most, the fact that she didn't even care enough to pretend to be interested in what I was feeling. It was like my emotions were an inconvenience to her. I remember one night in particular. I had just come home from work, completely exhausted. I had been working over wanted to surprise her with. I thought maybe some in the beginning. I walked in the door with takeout from her favorite restaurant, hoping we could have a nice evening together. But when I got home, she was sitting on the couch, barely even acknowledging my presence. I set the food down on the table, trying to get her attention, but she didn't even look up. When I said, "I'm not really hungry." That was the moment it hit me, like a punch to the gut. She didn't care. She didn't care about the food, the effort I put into the relationship, or me. It was like a switch had flipped in my head, and I couldn't unsee it anymore. The love I had been holding on to, the love I thought she felt for me, it wasn't there. And maybe it never had been. I started thinking about our relationship from the very beginning. Sure, we met in college and fell in love quickly, but was it real love? Or was it just convenience for her? Was I just someone to fill the time? Someone to support her while she figured out what she really wanted? I thought we had something special, but now, looking back, I can see that she was never as invested as I was. The more I think about it, the more I realize that I was just a means to an end for her. I was the guy who paid the bills, who kept the house running, who made sure everything was taken care of. But emotionally, I was a stranger to her. I thought I was building a future with someone who loved me. But now I realize I was just there, convenient and easy. But the thing is, it wasn't just Vivian who seemed indifferent. Or rather, Vivian's indifference wasn't the only issue in our marriage. The one underlying issue, the thing that really ate away at me over time, was her family. God, where do I even begin with them? From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't like me. At first, I tried to be optimistic about it. I thought it was just the typical awkwardness of meeting your partner's family for the first time. I figured they were being protective of their daughter and sister, which is normal, right? I told myself that they just needed time to warm up to me, but it didn't take long for their so-called protection to turn into something much uglier. I remember the very first time we met. It was a family barbecue, and I was already nervous enough as it was. I wanted to make a good impression, you know. But right from the start, there were these subtle, passive-aggressive comments about my weight. At first, I tried to brush them off as nerves, or maybe even misreading the situation. One of them made a joke about how everyone better grab their food quickly before I finished everything off. Everyone laughed, and I awkwardly joined in, not wanting to make a scene or seem oversensitive. But the comments didn't stop there. As the night went on, they kept making little digs, all disguised as just jokes. One of her cousins even patted me on the back and said something like, "Looks like someone's been hitting the snacks pretty hard, huh?" I laughed along with them, trying to stay calm. I figured they didn't know me well enough yet, and maybe it was just their weird way of breaking the ice. But as time went on, I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. Every time we had a family gathering or a holiday dinner, they would make these little comments, pretending it was all in good fun. It became a regular thing. My weight was the punchline to almost every joke. It wasn't just once or twice, it was every single time we saw them. The jokes started out as little remarks, things that could maybe pass as harmless if you didn't know the context. But over time, they became more pointed, more mean-spirited. They'd make comments about how I needed to lay off the gravy, or that I should be careful not to break the chair I was sitting in. And every single time, everyone would laugh. Vivian's parents, her siblings, her extended family. They'd all join in like it was the funniest thing in the world. Here's the thing. I didn't always struggle with my weight, but it's been a sensitive subject for me for years, and it got worse after I gained a lot of weight following a traumatic accident. A couple of years ago, I was in a car crash, and my best friend didn't make it. The grief, the guilt, the pain of losing him, it all became too much, and I just let myself go. I stopped working out, stopped caring about my diet, I spiraled, and the weight just piled on. I never really recovered from that. I've tried over the years to get back on track, but anyone who's ever dealt with something like this knows it's not easy. So, hearing those comments from people who were supposed to be my family, it crushed me. Every joke, every jab, it felt like they were throwing salt into an open wound. And the absolute worst part, Vivian never stood up for me, not once. Every time they made one of those jokes, she would laugh along with them. Sometimes she'd even make little remarks of her own, like, "Oh, you know Matthew loves his food." I can't even describe how much that hurt. The one person who was supposed to have my back, to be on my side, was actively contributing to the problem. When I first tried to talk to her about it, she would always defend them. She'd say, "That's just how my family is. They're big on teasing. It's how they show love." But how is that supposed to make me feel better? How was I supposed to believe that being the constant target of their love wasn't damaging? When you're the butt of every joke, it starts to wear you down, no matter how thick-skinned you think you are. I tried and tried, hoping to get her to see how much it was affecting me, but she would always brush it off. "That's just how they are, Matthew. Don't take it so seriously. You know they don't mean it." But how could I not take it seriously when it was happening every single time we saw them? When every family dinner became a source of anxiety for me because I knew I'd be walking into a room full of people who were just waiting to tear me down again? And every time I sat down with them, I had to brace myself for another round of jabs and playful insults about my body. I wanted to believe that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they really didn't mean it the way I was taking it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. When someone constantly makes fun of something you're deeply insecure about, it's not just a joke anymore. It's cruel. And the fact that Vivian didn't see that, or worse, didn't care, made me feel completely alone in our relationship. At first, I tried to keep my cool. I didn't want to cause any drama between Vivian and her family. I figured I could handle it, that I was strong enough to take it. I had been dealing with comments about my weight for years, so what was a few more? But the longer it went on, the more it chipped away at me. I started dreading every family event. Every time I saw her family's name pop up on my phone, inviting us to another dinner or holiday, my stomach would turn. I would make excuses not to go, claiming I had work or wasn't feeling well, just to avoid being in that environment. I felt trapped. I loved Vivian, but I couldn't stand the way her family treated me. And what made it worse was that she didn't seem to care. Every time I brought it up, she would dismiss it, telling me I was too sensitive or that I needed to lighten up. But how could I lighten up when the people I was supposed to call family was constantly tearing me down? The absolute worst part about all of it? The family, Vivian's family, was entirely dependent on me. That house they lived in, it belonged to me. It wasn't something they earned or even contributed to. It was something I gave them after they were on the verge of being homeless because they couldn't afford their rent. They had come to me, practically begging for help, and because I loved Vivian, I didn't hesitate. I handed them the keys and let them live there rent-free. It wasn't just the house, though. Over the years, I was constantly helping them out financially. I paid for their groceries, I covered medical bills when they needed it, and I even paid for her siblings' tuition. All of this out of my own pocket, and not once did they ever express genuine gratitude. Despite everything I did for them, the jokes never stopped. It was as if they felt entitled to mock me, like I was somehow beneath them. The comments kept coming, and every time it happened, it felt like a slap in the face, especially considering all the sacrifices I had made for their well-being. What stung even more was when the mocking happened in front of strangers or other relatives. It wasn't just an inside joke within the family anymore. They would humiliate me publicly, taking jabs at my weight or my appearance in front of people I didn't even know. I could see the pity in the eyes of those watching, and I would have to force a smile, pretending it didn't bother me, but deep down it crushed me. After a while, it all became too much to bear. I started to make excuses to avoid family gatherings altogether. I couldn't stand being in the same room as them, knowing I was walking into a battlefield where I was the constant target. Of course, my absence caused tension between me and Vivian. She couldn't understand why I didn't want to spend time with her family. And when I tried to explain, she would get defensive, telling me that I was being too sensitive, that it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal. I was reaching my breaking point, but she refused to see it. Then came the final straw, the night when everything snapped inside me. It was Vivian's birthday, and I couldn't avoid this one. No matter how much I wanted to skip it, I had to go. I had planned something quiet, something intimate, just the two of us, but Vivian insisted on having a big birthday dinner with her family. So, as always, I obliged. I organized the entire thing, booked the restaurant, and made sure everything was perfect. From the moment we arrived, I could feel the tension building. It was like they had been waiting for this moment, waiting to tear me down. The first comment came from one of her cousins, who asked, "How is Vivian still with you?" They said it with a smirk. And before I could even process it, someone else chimed in, "Yeah, Vivian, why are you still with him? You could do so much better." The table erupted in laughter, and it didn't stop there. The jabs kept coming, one after the other, each more vicious than the last. They joked about my weight, my appearance, even my job. I was completely cornered. There was no escape, no way out of the humiliation. I didn't even bother trying to fake a laugh this time. I just sat there quietly eating my food. The worst part wasn't the comments, though. It wasn't even the fact that they were attacking me so blatantly. It was the fact that, once again, Vivian did nothing. She sat there smiling and laughing along with them, as if this was all perfectly normal, as if I was supposed to just take it. She didn't defend me. She didn't stand up for me. She didn't even acknowledge the cruelty of what was happening right in front of her. And that's when something inside me snapped. At that moment, I realized that I had been holding back my feelings for far too long. I had spent years swallowing the pain, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But the truth was staring me right in the face. Vivian didn't respect me. Her family didn't respect me, and the ridicule had reached a point where it was unbearable. I had sacrificed so much for these people, my money, my time, my energy, and all I got in return was mockery and humiliation. Something inside me broke that night. I realized that I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I had been taking the high road for years, trying to be the bigger person, but it was killing me inside. The love I had for Vivian, the devotion I had for our relationship, it all felt like a cruel joke. I had given her everything, and in return, she had allowed her family to tear me down, time and time again. For years, I had been patient, respectful, and kind, hoping things would change, but all that had gotten me was ridicule and humiliation. It was clear now that if I wanted things to change, I would have to take control. I wasn't just going to stand up for myself, I was going to show these people what they truly deserved. That's when I began to craft a plan. I didn't just want to walk away from the toxicity. I wanted them to feel the sting of losing me. I wanted them to be stranded, left with no choice but to beg for my forgiveness. The first step, working on myself. I knew that I had to rebuild myself from the ground up, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. So I got serious. I started going to the gym religiously. I became a gym rat, pushing my body harder than I ever had before. I cut down on unhealthy foods and stuck to strict healthy meals. Day in and day out, I put in the work and watched the pounds slowly melt away. My goal wasn't just to lose weight, though. It was to transform into someone who radiated confidence and strength. I started distancing myself from Vivian. For too long, I had been the one who did everything in the marriage. I was the one planning the dates, organizing the family events, and constantly bending. But now, that stopped. I pulled back completely. No more initiating conversations, no more bending over backward to accommodate her family's whims, and no more trying to keep the peace. Confused, but oddly relieved. It was as if she was glad I wasn't clinging to her anymore, yet she couldn't help but wonder what had caused the sudden change. She knew me too well, knew that this wasn't like me, but I didn't explain a thing. As the months went by, my physical transformation became more noticeable. I was shedding weight, gaining muscle, and with each passing day, I felt more like myself than I had in years. I also continued to avoid every single family gathering. Vivian was annoyed, of course. The tension in our marriage was undeniable, but I didn't care. I stopped making excuses for myself and stopped explaining my actions to her. Whatever she had to say, I brushed it off. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. It took months of hard work, discipline, and distance, but eventually I got to a place where I was ready. I still wasn't at my ideal weight, but I had made significant progress, and more importantly, I had rebuilt my confidence. That's when I decided it was time for the final confrontation. There was a birthday party for one of Vivian's cousins coming up, that cousin. The same one who had humiliated me at Vivian's birthday by asking why she was still with me. I knew I had to attend that party, not just for closure, but because it was the perfect stage for what I had planned. Before the party, I had divorce papers drafted. I was done with Vivian, done with her family, and done with the toxic cycle I had been trapped in for years. While I was preparing to make my move, I enlisted the help of my sister and a few close friends. I asked them to go to the house during the party and pack up all of Vivian's things. I didn't want to drag this out any longer than it had to be. When we arrived at the birthday party, the reaction was everything I had anticipated. They hadn't seen me in months, and I could see the shock written all over their faces. I'm sure Vivian had been updating them on my weight loss journey, but none of them expected to see the drastic transformation that stood before them. For the first time, they were speechless. But just because they were stunned by my appearance didn't mean they were any less cruel. At dinner, the mocking inevitably started again. This time, though, the focus was different. They made snide comments about how I had lost weight so quickly, asking if I was on some kind of drug, insinuating that I had taken shortcuts, but I didn't laugh it off. Not this time. I stayed calm, waited for the perfect moment, and then I struck. I began calling each one of them out, systematically tearing down their condescending attitudes and exposing their insecurities. I pointed out how they had spent years projecting their own flaws onto me, and that for people who were financially dependent on me, they sure were confident. One by one, I laid bare their hypocrisies. There was no laughter this time. They were silent. I stripped away all their facades. Finally, I turned to Vivian. I told her I was done with her family, and done being the butt of their jokes. Without missing a beat, I stood up, walked out to the car, and retrieved the divorce papers I had stashed there. I tossed them onto the table in front of her, watched the shock spread across her face, and then, without another word, I walked out of that room. As I drove away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me, but I wasn't finished. Before I even got home, I transferred every single dollar out of our joint account into my personal one. I had earned that money, and I wasn't about to leave anything behind for Vivian to take advantage of. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my sister and friends had already finished packing up all of Vivian's belongings. They had neatly placed everything by the front door, ready for her when she inevitably came home. For the first time in years, I felt free. I had stood up for myself, reclaimed my dignity, and finally broken free from the toxic cycle that had been suffocating me for so long. Vivian and her family had lost the best thing they ever had, and they had no one to blame but themselves. And that's pretty much it. I'm not here on Reddit to get advice or whatever. I'm here just to rant and unload because, for the first time in years, I feel free. I stood up for myself, reclaimed my dignity, and finally broke free. So yeah, that's my story. No more bending over backward for people who don't care. No more biting my tongue while they laugh at my expense. I'm done, and I've never felt stronger or more at peace. Update.
Hey Reddit.
Wow, I did not expect the amount of traction my post would get. I left a couple of comments here and there, but seeing how many people are reading and responding has been overwhelming. The positivity has been off the charts, and I've been getting tons of supportive DMs, with people congratulating me, offering advice, and just sending words of encouragement. I honestly can't thank you all enough. This community has really lifted me up. It's been a couple of days now, and I do have a bit of an update to share. So first off, after my sister and my friends finished moving Vivian's stuff out, then I went ahead and texted Vivian to let her know that her things were on the porch. She didn't reply, but I'm pretty sure she read it. I sent it over WhatsApp as well, just to make sure, and again she read it but didn't respond. Honestly, that first night after everything was settled, I slept like a baby. It was the most peaceful, fulfilling sleep I've had in years. Waking up the next morning, I checked my phone. Still no message from her. I didn't care. However, her things were no longer outside. I went ahead and got the locks changed on the house. Then I sent her another text, this time telling her to sign the divorce papers so we could get the ball rolling. No response from her again, but I could sense what she was doing. I think she believed that ignoring me would make me crawl back, like I used to. In the past, whenever we had fights and she was upset, she'd give me the silent treatment, and every time I'd come running, groveling, begging her to forgive me, like a dog, really. But this time, not anymore. She ignored me, so I ignored her too. I had said what I needed to say, and I knew she had read my messages. There was nothing left for me to do. Now, the next step is getting her family out of my house. Thankfully, the house is still in my name. Vivian had pressured me for years to transfer ownership over to her family, and I'm so glad I resisted. Back then, I was reluctant because of how much they mocked me, and I just couldn't trust them with something that significant. Vivian had insisted, of course, but I held my ground. Thank God I did. So now the focus is on evicting her family. They've been living there rent-free for years thanks to me. I paid for everything, tuition, insurance, bills, you name it. But now, it's time for them to go. Legally, I think I'm in the clear, because we had an agreement in writing that they were only staying there at my discretion and wouldn't pay rent. They threw a fit when I asked them to sign that document back then, but it's the one thing I was adamant about. And now, it's saving me. And I'm going to give them 2 weeks to pack their things and get out. I'm not going to give them any longer than that. To make sure they don't cause any problems, I'm planning to bring a friend who's a cop with me when I go to deliver the news. I know if I show up alone, they'll probably try to talk their way out of it or refuse to leave. But with an officer there, they won't have a choice. Once I give them the eviction notice, I'm cutting them off financially too. No more paying their bills, no more covering their tuition, and I'll be removing them from my insurance as well. They've been bleeding me dry for too long, and I'm done supporting people who have treated me with nothing but disrespect. So, yeah, that's the plan moving forward. I'll be sure to update you all again if anything noteworthy happens. But for now, I'm focused on getting my life back and making sure I never allow myself to fall into this kind of situation again. Thank you all so much for the support and kind words. It means the world to me. Update.
No.
Hey Reddit, sorry for going silent for a bit. A lot of you have been DMing me, asking for updates, and now I finally have something to share. First off, I finally got Vivian and her family out of the house. As you know, she had been staying there along with her family, and after everything that happened, I knew it was time to get them all out. Like I mentioned before, I went to a friend of mine who's a cop to deliver the eviction notice. We gave them 2 weeks to move out. As expected, they were shocked and tried to talk their way out of it. They pulled the usual manipulation tactics, trying to guilt me, but with my friend there, they couldn't get anywhere. He was stern and made it clear that they had no other option but to leave. Before I even got home that day, Vivian was bombarding my phone with messages and calls. She was telling me I was taking things too far, that she knew they were wrong, and that she was sorry. It was the usual gaslighting, trying to convince me I was overreacting by cutting her and her family off financially. She admitted that withdrawing all the money from the joint accounts was fair, but kicking her family out was, in her words, too far. She went on to call me a crook and even a pervert, throwing all kinds of nonsense at me to make me feel guilty. But honestly, it didn't faze me anymore. I just responded by telling her to sign the divorce papers and reminded her that I wanted them out of my house within the next 2 weeks. Maybe they thought I would change my mind, or that I'd go soft, because when I showed up after the 2-week period, they still weren't ready to leave. So I brought my cop friend with me again, and this time I hired some movers to speed things up. We got them out of there quickly. Thank God there wasn't any physical resistance. The moment they saw my friend, they realized there was no point in fighting, and they just complied. They shot me angry glares the entire time, but I didn't care. I changed the locks that same day, and now I'm thinking of selling the house or maybe renting it out for some actual income. It didn't take long before I started getting texts from all of them, not just Vivian. At first, it was begging, asking me to let them back into the house, claiming they had nowhere to go. Then, when that didn't work, it quickly turned into insults and curses. I got them off my phone plan, insurance, and everything else I was paying for. No more bills, no more financial support, completely cut them off. Vivian has been texting me nonstop for the last few days, oscillating between begging me to let her family back in and threatening me. She's now saying that she won't sign the divorce papers, trying to hold that over my head. But I told her straight up that it doesn't matter whether she signs or not. We're getting a divorce. All not signing does is drag out the process and make things more difficult for both of us, but in the end, it won't change the outcome. The divorce is already in motion, and there's no going back. For years, I let them mock me, belittle me, and tear me down. I kept telling myself it would get better, that if I kept being patient and kind, things would change. But the truth is, nothing changes unless you make the change. And I finally did. I stopped living for their approval, stopped letting their words control how I saw myself. It wasn't easy, none of it was. But the feeling of walking away from that life, from those people who never appreciated me, was worth every single step. It feels like I've taken back control of my life, my happiness, and my future. I didn't do it for revenge or to prove anything to them. I did it for me. I'm done with Vivian. For far too long, they've drained me dry, financially, emotionally, in every way possible. I've been nothing but disrespected, and I finally stood up for myself. It feels good to take control of my life again. I'll keep you all posted if anything major happens, but for now, I'm just focusing on moving forward. Thanks again for all the support, Reddit. It means a lot. Update. Hello, Reddit. I just want to start by saying how grateful I am for all the support. Honestly, who would have thought that a bunch of internet strangers could help me feel this positive and happy? Your kind words, encouragement, and advice have meant the world to me, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you all so much. I do have a bit of an update. It's not much, but it's something. So, I heard from a mutual friend that Vivian and her family are really struggling right now. Apparently, they had nowhere to go after I kicked them out, and they've had to spread themselves thin. To be honest, I do feel a little bad about it, but not that bad. So what do I mean by spread themselves thin? Well, for starters, Vivian's parents are now staying with her grandparents. But here's the thing. It's super complicated because the grandparents' house isn't big enough for all of them. And by all of them, I don't just mean Vivian's parents and her siblings. No, there's more to it than that. Vivian's elder brother is married with kids. Her elder sister isn't married, but also has kids. And all of them were living in my house before I kicked them out. So you can imagine how cramped it must be. With so many people trying to squeeze into the grandparents' house, things got messy. Vivian's sister and her kids couldn't fit, so they ended up at a homeless shelter. Meanwhile, Vivian and some of her siblings are staying with an aunt. The rest of her siblings, I think, are with another aunt. And as for her brother, well, I honestly can't remember what my friend said about him. I think I zoned out a bit during that part of the conversation because honestly, at this point, it's not really my concern. Don't get me wrong, I'm not heartless. I feel bad for them to some extent. No one wants to see anyone struggle like that, but the reality is they brought this on themselves. Not one of them treated me well when they were living in my house. They took advantage of me, disrespected me, and made me feel like I wasn't worth anything. So, yeah, I feel bad, but not bad enough to regret what I did. They've had plenty of chances to fix things, and they chose not to. So that's where things stand right now. I'm focusing on myself, my future, and making sure I don't let anyone treat me like that ever again. Thanks again for all your support, Reddit. It really has made a difference. Update. Hello, Reddit. I'm so sorry for the radio silence again. I know I've said that too many times, but honestly, it's not that I forget to update. I just haven't had much to share. Vivian's family situation hasn't improved at all. From what I've heard through a mutual friend, she's still struggling to find a job, but nothing's come through yet. To be honest, I didn't want to hear any of it because I really don't care about Vivian or her family anymore. On a much brighter note, the divorce has finally been finalized, and I can't express how relieved I am. It took less than an hour at the courthouse, thank goodness. I was just eager to get it over with. I think Vivian thought she might walk away with something, but she didn't even bother to hire a lawyer. I guess that speaks volumes about their financial situation. The look on her face when she realized she wouldn't get anything was priceless. She didn't qualify for spousal support or alimony, since all the assets were mine and not marital. The only things she took with her were some sentimental items and a couple of stuff, nothing of real value. Honestly, I had seen this coming. My lawyer had prepared me for it, explaining the laws in my state and how everything would play out. After the hearing, Vivian cursed me out in the courtroom and then cried. I've been getting some messages from her, and even a few from anonymous numbers, insulting me. But instead of feeling bad, I actually feel relieved. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. She deserves every bit of it for how she treated me. Now I'm focusing on myself. I recently got a promotion at work, which has kept me busy and motivated. I'm committed to building a better future for myself and ensuring I never let anyone treat me the way she did. On top of that, I've lost a few more pounds. So yes, to weight loss, and finally getting closer to that dream body I've always wanted. Thanks for all the support, Reddit. It really has made a difference in my journey. Here's to new beginnings.